And a very happy day to all of you listeners listening to this episode of Ensnaring the Muse. Today we have singer-songwriter Peter Spencer, and we'll be talking about poetry and music and influences. Let's go. Welcome, Peter Spencer. It's so good to see you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I want to dive right into this. As a singer and songwriter, where do you draw inspiration?
Well, I guess the first thing I have to say is I've been doing it for a very long time.
Yeah.
I was the first time I was paid to perform music for people was in 1968.
Oh wow.
Um, Something of a child star, but when I started out, it was Bob Dylan, just like everybody else.
Okay.
And what what he showed me as a teenager was first off an appreciation for poetry, especially beat
Yeah.
poetry, and of course
Yeah.
I'd been reading a lot of poetry too, and so we shared that, and also the side of the folk music and folk rock music thing that was happening in the 60s,
Hmm.
um, that interested me the most was that it concentrated on the music of marginalized communities.
Hmm.
And now, in particular, in 1968, it started off with blues. And so I started hanging out with 78 collectors. Although I never had too many 78s myself. Those things are heavy.
Yeah.
Once once
Right.
once you get them, you can't move. You're in your apartment for life. Um, but uh, but I certainly liked hanging out with collectors and
Hmm.
and talking about different kinds of old music.
Yeah, you guys were
Um,
ahead of the curve. Records are
well,
are a hot commodity these days.
oh yeah, yeah. In fact, that's I'm actually so far either ahead or behind the curve
Yeah.
that I don't really understand.
Yeah.
I don't really understand the 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 taste for vinyl. Um, but so it's been a question of searching and discovering different kinds of music, and it all centers on my guitar playing.
Right.
Um, if I can come up with with music on the guitar that draws on those sources,
Hmm.
and interests me, then then I start asking myself what it is I want to say, not the other way around.
Right. And it's interesting that one of the first things you go to is poetry. And I was reading. I used to teach an audio music audio class for the community college, and we would talk about songwriting. And I would always recommend the book How to Write Better Lyrics or Writing Better Lyrics. I forget who the author is, but it's published by Berkeley Press. And one of the first things that the author says in that book is if it if you can't remember the last time you picked up a book of poetry, go do that because you are what you eat, right? And so the more poetry that you can read, really of any genre, the better your lyrics will come
Yeah,
as a result.
and it's not
Yeah.
just because poetry is somehow better prose, or
Hmm.
or that the
Right.
language is so wonderfully elevated. What what I really get from poetry is the way that a poet has to make what they want to say fit.
Yeah. Yep.
There's the rhythm, there's a
Hmm.
meter there, and if you do it right,
Yep.
it distills the language down to its essence, and the lyrics then work with
Right.
the melody,
Right.
um, and that that's what you really want.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people who, well, let me back up. Songs, to me, songs are poetry set to music.
Yes.
They're not journal entries set to riffs.
Right.
They're not, they're not diaries.
Hmm.
Um, that you know, it's the two have to work together.
Right. Right. Yeah, Stephen Sondheim, who's a Broadway composer and lyricist, he likened it to crossword puzzles in a way, because you're working in a confined, you're working under certain parameters, but you've got something to say.
Oh, very much.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would recommend another thing I would recommend to young songwriters:
Mhm.
Scrabble.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even
Find,
think about that.
you
I'm a
know,
terrible speller, so I always lose at Scrabble, you know.
Oh well, but it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
There are several different things that you can involve yourself in
Hmm.
that will give you a kind of not so much an intellectual understanding, but
Hmm.
a sort of physical understanding of the way the two elements go together to make a third thing that is actually stronger than either of the other two.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I wanted to go into some of your music. You were nice enough to send me um, almost a full album, which I've enjoyed listening to. I thought we could listen to just like the first minute of what God Came. Sorry, the title's all blurred out. I don't know why.
Yeah, God
And
came from Anacortes.
Anacortes. Thank you. Yeah. So I gotta do this thing where I'm sharing the screen. There we go. All right, and let's just give this a listen for about a minute or so, and then we'll talk about it.
God came from Anacortes with his last temple ball. He'd been up there all winter, sitting facing the wall. He fell in with some town girls in their jackets and boots, with their double duty smiles and their mismatched roots. And remembering their names was the best he could do to them all. Anyway, hey,
You, oh, oops. I think anybody could hear those folk influences that you were talking about when we
Well,
started this conversation.
for instance, the guitar riff that opens the tune before
Hmm.
I start singing is a kind of long distance acknowledgement of Clarence Ashley's banjo part on a song called "The Cuckoo."
Oh wow. Okay.
An old time song that he recorded. Clarence Ashley uh, was a longtime Appalachian musician and performer. When Doc Watson was discovered in the early '60s, it was playing with Clarence Ashley.
Nice.
The first album Doc Watson did was called Old Time Music at Clarence Ashley's, and the Cuckoo is one of those songs. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird.
Hmm.
Um, but I just now it's funny you should um, start with that song
Hmm.
because it was it it was the rare song of mine that didn't start with the music.
Okay.
that I had a lyric concept first,
Okay.
and it was after a while, you set yourself these challenges, these practical challenges, more just to give yourself a sporting chance, I guess.
Well, it keeps things
And
fresh. It keeps you on your toes, I think.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
and the practical challenge here was place names.
Okay.
You know, there's one of the cool things about Bruce Springsteen is he uses place names. I'm going down to St. Mary's Gate,
Yeah.
or all these different place names, some of which I'm sure he just makes up.
Hmm.
But I've never done that.
Okay.
I did 40 years ago. I wrote a song called "The Street of Montreal,"
Mm.
and I had never been to Montreal. I just
Hmm.
Montreal, because you put it at the end of the line, you can rhyme it with a lot of stuff.
Oh wow.
That's it. Um, and so when I finally got to Montreal, of course, I realized that I could just as well have been writing about Spokane.
Right.
But um, the so I set myself this challenge of different places here in the Northwest. Now, Anacortes is a fishing village up north,
Hmm.
and it anchors a ferry line that tourists take to go whale watching.
Hmm.
Um, uh, kind of. I'm sure there are people who love it, but my impression of it is really pretty much nowheresville. And when I started with that, then I remembered the biblical passage where someone, where Jesus is just starting his ministry, and somebody says he's from Nazareth.
Yes.
Can anything good come
What?
from Nazareth?
Right. Nothing good comes from Nazareth.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, so Anacortes struck me as that kind of town,
Okay.
Pioneer Square, which I mentioned, I think in the second verse,
Mm.
um, is the Skid Row, the old part of Seattle. The Skid Row. It was also the center for the grunge music of the '90s. Um, so that's pretty straightforward. And then Paulsbo is a kind of cozy little bedroom community.
Hmm.
Um, little touristy, not not terribly memorable.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's sort of where everybody ends up. Um, so I started with this, and then
Hmm.
thinking about the current scene, and so after a while, I don't know, I wanted to leave it a kind of a mystery
Hmm.
as to who the narrator is. Who is this person talking?
Mm.
Um, which is something Dylan does brilliantly.
Hmm. Right.
That's been the Dylan MO from the beginning, is
Right.
leave out crucial pieces of information to heighten the mystery, and if you're lucky, the poetry of the song.
Well, and I think that is the essence of poetry. I think of like the Leonard Bernstein. He talks about the difference between poetry and prose. He says that the town was made up of old men and women, right? Is prose, but the town was old men and women is poetry. It's not especially good poetry, but because
But
it.
that's the difference, and that's what I
Mhm.
was talking about before,
Yeah.
about the effect of using meter
Hmm.
and rhythm to distill your lyrics down to fit
Right.
them, and heighten the impact. When it goes well, that it has a greater impact.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's kind of like the same kind of goal when a joke lands, because it's like a good joke can awaken something inside of you,
Yeah,
and
I think there's a buried synapse
yeah,
in your
yes,
in your brain that clicks on when that happens.
I agree. I agree. The other thing that struck me about that piece is you've got a very distinct style of guitar playing. I would call it, and see what you think about this. I would call it as like an assertive style of guitar playing.
Yeah, that's in a way that's something I've been fighting for a long
Oh,
time
okay.
because um, as I was building my guitar chops,
Hmm.
um, I was listening to a lot of country and bluegrass players, and the aesthetic in that is super fast,
Hmm.
super clean, and act like you're doing nothing at all.
Okay.
Stand like a statue and have this music pour out of you.
Right.
Um, and I mean, for the first 20 years or more, that was really what I was pursuing, and I think I just did it too well.
Hmm. Okay.
It made people kind of nervous because everything. I mean, I just someone sent me a concert tape that I did in 1979,
Hmm.
and those tempos were ungodly fast. And I shared it with a friend of mine who I had known back in Greenwich Village back in the day, and he said, "Yeah, I saw you around that time, and my one thought was, boy, this guy needs to relax."
Oh, wow.
And so now
Yeah.
you've got this steady thumb beat though.
Hmm.
It's not like you can suddenly not keep time with your
Yeah.
thumb.
Yeah.
Um, but we gotta rein those tempos in, and I think God Came for Anacortes is a an example of that. You know, in the '70s, I would have played that wicked fast.
Oh, okay. Okay. Interesting. Well, yeah, I actually agree with you. You know, it strikes me as very satisfying with the tempo that it's at now. You know, but the other thing that you talked about with the guitar, that it was a kind of homage to a banjo part. And it does, you know, and since you said that, you know, I can hear the banjo influence in that, especially with the, like the thumb beat that you're talking about.
Well, the one of the guys who sort of came along and whose playing kind of knocked me out of just this constant steady thumb,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which is fun while it lasted, um, was Jerry Reed,
Okay.
who would play a gut string guitar,
Okay.
and he could play that down up thumb,
Mm-hmm.
but he a lot of times he'd play it like a banjo,
Mm-hmm.
like a forward roll, boo doo dee, boo doo dee, boo doo dee, boo doo dee, like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, super sophisticated harmonic. You know, knew all his stuff. Um, and so that's again that's one of the influences I try to cultivate to keep from being nothing but this bang 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 bang
Right.
thumb.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think it works unbelievably well. If it's okay with you, maybe we could listen to Emily and talk about that a little bit.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. I gotta share screen again. Uh, you're the first artist that I've done this with, where we actually go through the tracks. So
Oh.
yeah. All right, here we go.
Emily is whispering behind the door. She says we can't be in the same room anymore. She slides a little envelope across the floor. Oh, fare you well, fare you well. Please walk out with me one more evening if you dare. Then I'll go west and preach the holy gospel there. everywhere. Oh, fare you well, fare you well, fare you well. The little motors humming in the walls.
I hate stopping that. That is a deeply beautiful song, man. That's
Well, I'm glad you held on to it until we
yeah.
got to the line about the little motors humming in the walls, because
Yeah.
that's my favorite line in the song.
So all right. So you didn't tell me anything about these tracks when you sent them to me. Um, and sometimes songs can be kind of like a Rorschach test of like whatever the listener hears in the song is what the song's about. Is that something fair to say?
Yeah.
Is this song about Emily Dickinson?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that comes through crystal clear.
I'm so glad. I
Yeah.
wrestled with that because, I
Yeah.
didn't know how overt to make it.
Right. No, it's fantastic. Yeah.
There's a danger in being too in groupy. If
Yeah. Yeah.
but I didn't want to say.
Hmm.
Besides, Dickinson, that's not a word that scans.
No, no, it isn't. But the thing is, like, you would have to know her work and her life. I think for somebody, who's like not familiar with her work and her life, they would. th- I think they would probably get something completely different out of it.
Well, I would hope that they would get something out of it.
Yeah.
That it wouldn't just be opaque to them.
No, no. I think like the idea of the relationship of somebody isolating themselves, and I think between like the slow drum beats, it almost seems like anticipatory breaths in a way,
Hmm.
like the song to me communicates a deep loneliness.
Well, that's really the story that it tells. It's
Hmm.
not really quote unquote about
Right,
Emily Dickinson at all. It's about the guy.
right,
It's
right.
about this hopeless lover who's never going to get anything out of her but
Yeah,
the occasional scribbled poem.
right.
And in the end, the whole world is that guy
It,
because that's
that,
all anybody got from her.
that's exactly where I was gonna, what I was gonna say. Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful, man, and the instrumentation is fantastic in that.
It's going back to guitar technique for a minute.
Hmm.
That's a good example of me trying to alter the right hand technique.
Hmm.
Instead of down, up, it's just down, and then maybe a couple little exit. Down, be do,
Hmm.
down, be do. And then sometimes, baff, a kind
Yeah,
of strum with the back of my middle finger.
right.
Boom, do baff.
It's a
Um,
kind of flamenco-ish in a way.
in a
Yeah.
way, that's not a music I know as much about as I wish I did.
Hmm.
But I've done some listening,
Right.
and there are guitar teachers around here who have studied it more than me, and I can always go to them when I want. The one thing I've never been able to use out of flamenco, again in right hand technique,
Mhm.
is that bluang, that
Right.
big full
Right.
hand strum starting from your little finger.
Hmm.
Bluang. I've got to
Right.
get this in the picture somehow.
Yeah.
Bluang.
Right. Well, I think guitarists would know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Gosh, these half hours go by so fast. We've talked about your guitar playing and your songwriting and poetry, but the thing that we haven't talked about is your singing. That I love how you embrace that low register of your singing and how beautifully that cuts through the instrumentation. And I'm a sound engineer, and I don't mean to get super wonky or nerdy on this, but I don't think people appreciate how difficult that is to do with male voices that are lower.
Well, it's I like male voices.
Hmm.
My father's a harmony arranger. I
Oh,
grew
okay.
up listening to
Nice.
six voice singers groups. You know, him and his buddies around the piano at night, and I'd sneak out of bed and sit and hold on to the railing of the stairs
Nice.
and listen. Um, and it's left me with I won't say a bias, but a strong interest in men's voices,
Okay.
from low to high.
Yeah.
And while I'm never going to be I was going to say I'm never going to be Brian Wilson in terms of singing those high parts, but when I was a teenager, I could sing those. I could sing those
Hmm.
high lines too in the Beach Boys records.
Nice.
Not anymore. Not anymore. Um, but I do try to have a different timbral approach depending on whether I'm singing Emily is whispering behind the door. Now I'm
Yeah.
exaggerating that a little
Yeah.
bit,
Yeah.
but to God came from Anacortes.
Hmm.
Um, and it's it's the same voice,
Hmm.
but it it has different emotional connotations
Yes.
depending on how you use it.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's what contributes to the whole artist, that this music that you've shared with us, and thank you for doing that. Is really an amalgamation. It's an amalgamation of the words that you have to say, the way that you say it, and the tools that you use to say it.
And the source material.
Well, certainly that. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I've always dedicated myself to what I call the source material
Right.
in a way that not a lot of songwriters, especially not a lot of songwriters of subsequent, which is to say post Bob Dylan generations,
Yeah.
do. I'm not sure a lot of these people get that.
Right, right. I think there are artists, but you have to dig a little bit deeper into like the indie communities, you,
Yeah,
who are carrying that torch.
that's true. And and
Uh,
and next, next generation songwriters are presented with the same, even greater difficulties than I had in terms of coming up with your own original statement.
that's for sure a
You know, the
challenge.
the
Yeah,
fields have been pretty well gleaned
yeah,
um, in the 40, 50
yeah.
years that I've been doing it.
Well, and at what I was reading that artists upload 40,000 tracks to Spotify every single day. I mean, that you want to talk about saturation of the market. It's like,
That's
how do you?
that's one reason why so far I have not gone real big in terms of online
Yeah,
stuff because it's thousands upon thousands
yeah,
upon thousands of people, and most of them are half-assed or quarter-assed or
uh,
no-assed, and it just makes it harder to to do your very best
yes,
work.
yes. I wholeheartedly agree. And these are, every generation of music presents new challenges. And I think that's what we have to deal with. Um, very briefly, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you are in the process. Speaking of finding you online, you're in the process of updating your website. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wish it was done and forgotten.
Oh, right.
But
Yeah.
I've been saying, well, for a year, maybe more like 2 years, I've been
Right.
saying, yeah, it's going to happen eventually.
Right. Well, what about the music that we listened to today? Is that available anywhere?
Yeah, I think you can go to the website and buy those albums.
Great. Great.
Um, it's funny. I've got like 5 or 6 albums
Hmm.
on CD Baby
Hmm.
and maybe some other places too. Um, and because I know CD Baby sort of ships things out, and then I've got
Hmm.
the the website such as it is. And I think the tracks that I sent you are from the two of those albums that I would most strongly recommend.
Okay.
People are going to look at a list of 6 albums and they're going to wonder, which one should I get?
Right.
One of the albums is called 1896 because I recorded it on an 1896 parlor guitar
Wow.
in an abandoned schoolhouse here on Bainbridge Island that was built in 1896, and so all the wood you hear is from that same year. So anyway, 1896 is the one, and the other one's called Fare You Well.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll be sure to link, below in the description, your website, and hopefully people will go there. And Peter, thank you so much. This was a fantastic experience for me. I thoroughly enjoyed your music.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I hope we'll keep in contact.
I hope so too. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Michael. It was great talking to you, and I hope I get a chance to talk to you soon. Hey, perhaps in the same space in the real world.
Oh, hey, wouldn't that be something?
One of these,
So,
as Charlie Patton used to say, "Lumdier." He means some of these days, someday.
Awesome.
Lumdier.
Awesome. Well, you take care, Peter.
Okay.
Bye bye.